The massive ships moved through space like dark mountains floating in the void. Each one was bigger than most moons, their black hulls covered in weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single shot. The Velcran Empire had built these ships for one purpose: to conquer worlds and make them bow down. Admiral Kairos stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devastator. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 arms that moved with careful precision. His red eyes looked out at the stars ahead, already planning how to add another star system to his empire's collection. Behind him, dozens of officers worked at their stations, all of them focused on the coming conquest. "Report," Kairos said, his voice echoing through the bridge. Commander Vex stepped forward. She was younger than the Admiral, but had already helped conquer 50 worlds. "The 7th Conquest Fleet is ready, sir. 200 dreadnoughts, 500 cruisers, and 1,000 support ships. We have enough firepower to glass every planet in the Terran sector." Kairos nodded. The Terran sector was their next target. Intelligence reports said the humans who lived there were primitive creatures who had barely learned to travel between stars. They had no real weapons, no strong shields, and no allies. This would be another easy victory to add to the Empire's long list. "What do we know about these humans?" Kairos asked. Vex touched a control panel, and a hologram appeared showing a small blue planet. "They call their homeworld Earth. They only developed faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Their ships are small and weak. Their weapons are mostly kinetic projectiles and basic energy beams. They have no quantum shields and no planet-killing weapons." The Admiral smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "Pathetic. How many worlds do they control?" 12 colonies, sir. All of them lightly defended. Our intelligence suggests they have maybe 200 warships total, and most of those are cargo ships with guns attached." Kairos laughed, a sound like metal scraping against stone. 200 ships against our fleet of 1,700. This will be over before it begins." The bridge crew shared his confidence. The Velcran Empire had been conquering worlds for 300 years. In all that time, they had never faced a species that could stand against them for more than a few days. Most surrendered as soon as they saw the size of the Velcran fleet. The smart ones sent surrender messages before the first shot was fired. The Empire's way of war was simple and effective. They would arrive at a star system with overwhelming force. They would demand surrender. If the locals refused, they would destroy a few cities to show their power. After that, surrender always came. Quickly. "Sir," said the communications officer, "we're receiving updates from the advanced scouts. They confirm that human military technology is even more primitive than we thought. Their largest ships are less than 2 kilometers long. Most are much smaller." Kairos turned to look at the tactical display. It showed the human colonies scattered across 12 star systems. Each one was marked with details about its defenses. The numbers were laughable. The humans had maybe 50 ships per system on average. Many systems had less than 10. "How long until we reach their space?" he asked. 6 days, sir," replied the navigation officer. "Good. Send a message to High Command. Tell them we expect to complete this conquest within 1 standard month. Probably less." The message was sent across the galaxy to the Velcran homeworlds. There, the Empire's leaders were already planning how to use the new human territories. The worlds would be strip-mined for resources. The humans would be put to work in factories and farms. Some might be kept as entertainment for Velcran nobles who enjoyed watching lesser species struggle. This was how the Velcran Empire had grown so large. They found weak species, conquered them, and used their resources to build more ships for the next conquest. It was a system that had worked perfectly for centuries. On the bridge of the Devastator, Kairos reviewed the battle plans. The fleet would split into 12 groups, 1 for each human system. They would attack all the colonies at the same time so the humans couldn't warn each other or combine their forces. Each group had more than enough power to handle whatever weak defenses they might find. "Commander Vex," Kairos said, "make sure all ship captains understand their orders. We want this conquest to be clean and quick." Destroy any military targets, but leave the infrastructure intact. These worlds will be useful to the Empire once we control them. Yes, sir. What about human civilians? Standard procedure. Anyone who resists dies. Anyone who surrenders becomes a worker. Make sure the humans understand that cooperation means survival. The fleet continued its journey through hyperspace, moving faster than light toward human territory. Inside each massive ship, thousands of Velcran soldiers prepared their weapons and armor. They had done this many times before. They knew exactly what to expect, but Admiral Kairos and his officers had made one mistake. They assumed that all species were the same. They thought that any intelligent life form would choose to live under Velcran rule rather than die fighting. This assumption had been correct for 300 years and 400 conquered worlds. The humans were about to prove them wrong, as the Velcran fleet traveled through the darkness between stars. Emergency meetings were happening on Earth and the other human colonies. Long-range sensors had detected the approaching enemy fleet weeks ago. The humans knew they were coming and they knew how badly they were outnumbered, but instead of preparing surrender messages, the humans were preparing for war. In military bases across human space, soldiers loaded weapons and checked equipment. In shipyards, workers rushed to complete new warships and repair old ones. In government buildings, leaders made plans for evacuation and resistance. The humans had studied every piece of information they could find about the Velcran Empire. They knew about the conquered worlds and the species that had been enslaved. They knew that surrender meant the end of human freedom forever. So they made a choice that no other species had made before. They decided to fight even though they knew they would probably lose. They decided that some things were more important than survival. Admiral Kairos and his fleet were about to learn something that 300 years of easy victories had never taught them. They were about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. The collision would change the galaxy forever. Captain Daeho Kim stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the stars through the main viewscreen. His ship was humanity's newest heavy cruiser, built with the best technology Earth could produce. At 800 meters long, it was considered large by human standards. The crew of 400 was handpicked from the best officers in the human defense fleet. "Captain," said Lieutenant Soo-Jin Park from the tactical station, "long-range sensors are picking up something strange. Multiple contacts approaching from the outer system." Daeho walked over to look at her display. The screen showed dozens of red dots moving toward human space. "How many?" "I'm counting over 1,000 ships, sir. They're big. Much bigger than anything in our fleet." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. The alien fleet they had been warned about was finally here. For weeks, intelligence reports had spoken of a massive enemy force approaching human territory. Now they were seeing it with their own eyes. "Communications," Daeho said to Ensign Haijin Lee at the com station. "Send a priority message to Fleet Command. Tell them the Velcran fleet has arrived in the Proxima system." "Yes, sir." Chief Engineer Woo Bin Choi looked up from his station. "Captain, should we withdraw?" "We're just one ship against that entire fleet." Daeho considered the question. His orders were clear: patrol the outer colonies and report any alien activity. But he also had standing orders to protect human space from invasion. The Defiant was alone out here, the closest human ship to the approaching enemy. "No," he said. "Finally, we hold position. If they want to enter human space, they'll have to explain themselves first." Soo-Jin stared at her captain. "Sir, there are over 1,000 enemy ships out there. We can't fight them all." "Maybe not," Daeho replied, "but we can make them stop and talk. Send all crew to battle stations. Raise shields and charge weapons." The alarm sounded throughout. The ship crew members ran to their posts, preparing for what might be the last battle they would ever fight. In the engine room, Woo Bin pushed the reactor to full power. In the weapons bay, gunners loaded the rail cannons with armor-piercing rounds. On the bridge, Haijin monitored communications channels. "Captain, I'm receiving a transmission from the alien fleet." They're demanding that we identify ourselves and state our intentions. Put it on screen. The view screen changed to show the interior of the Velcron flagship. Admiral Kairos appeared, his forearms folded behind his back, his red eyes staring directly at Deho. When he spoke, his voice was translated by the ship's computer. I am Admiral Kairos of the Velcron Empire. You are in the path of our conquest fleet. Identify your species and prepare to surrender. Deho stepped forward. I am Captain Deho, Kim of the United Earthship Defiant. This is human space. You're not welcome here. Kairos looked amused. Human space? We have come to claim these worlds for the Velcron Empire. You will stand aside and allow our fleet to pass. I'm afraid I can't do that, Admiral. These systems are under the protection of the Human Defense Fleet. If you wish to enter our territory, you'll need to negotiate with our government first. The alien admiral's expression changed from amusement to confusion. You speak of negotiation? There's nothing to negotiate. We are the Velcron Empire. We take what we want. You will surrender or be destroyed. Then you'll have to destroy us, Deho said calmly. Because we're not moving. Kairos stared at the human captain for a long moment. In 300 years of conquest, no one had ever spoken to him like this. Species usually begged for mercy or tried to buy time with offers of tribute. This human was doing neither. You do not understand, Kairos said slowly. We have over 1,000 ships. You have one. This is not a battle you can win. Maybe not, Deho agreed. But it's a battle we're willing to fight. The transmission ended. On the Velcron flagship, Kairos turned to his officers. What do you make of this? Commander Vex shook her head. I don't understand it, sir. Their ship is tiny compared to ours. They must know they can't win. Why don't they surrender? Perhaps. They're insane, suggested another officer. Some species go mad when faced with superior force? Kairos studied the tactical display. The human ship was holding position directly in front of his fleet, like a mouse standing in front of a herd. Of elephants? Run a scan of their vessel? I want to know what we're dealing with. The scan results appeared on his screen. The human ship was armed with kinetic weapons and basic energy shields. Its armor was thick but primitive. By Velcron standards, it was barely more than a patrol boat. Sir, said Vex, shall I order the fleet to fire? We can destroy them in seconds, Kairos hesitated. Something about this situation bothered him. The human captain had seemed calm, almost peaceful. He had shown no fear, even when facing impossible odds. In Kairos's experience, only two types of beings acted that way, the insane and the truly dangerous. Open a channel again, he ordered. Deho's face appeared on the screen. Yes, Admiral. I will give you one final chance, Kairos said. Move your ship aside and we will spare your life. Continue to block our path and we will destroy you. I appreciate the offer, Deho replied, but I have my orders. These systems are under human protection. If you want to pass, you'll have to go through us first. Very well. Kairos cut the transmission and turned to his weapons officer. Target their ship. Fire a warning shot. Put it close enough to damage their shields but not destroy them. Yes, sir. The Velcron fleet opened. Fire. A single energy beam, bright as a small sun, lanced out from the flagship and struck the space near the Defiant. The human ship rocked from the near miss. Its shields flaring with absorbed energy. On the Defiant's bridge, sparks flew from overloaded circuits. Sujin called out damage reports while Wubin struggled to keep the shield stable. No major damage, Sujin reported, but that was just a warning shot. A direct hit would destroy us. Deho nodded. Haijin, open a channel to the Velcron fleet. When the connection was established, Deho spoke clearly and calmly. Thank you for the demonstration, Admiral. Now let me show you ours. He turned to Sujin. Target their flagship. Fire one round. Sir, are you sure? That will start a war. The war already started when they entered our space uninvited. Sujin locked onto the Velcron flagship and fired. The Defiant's main rail cannon launched a tungsten rod at incredible speed. The projectile crossed the distance between the ships in seconds and struck the Devastator's forward shields. The result shocked everyone on both sides. The kinetic projectile punched through the Velcrin shields like they weren't there and left a deep crater in the flagship's armor. Alarms sounded throughout the massive ship as damage control teams rushed to seal hull breaches on the Velcrin bridge. Kairos stared at his damage reports in disbelief. How is this possible? Their weapons are primitive. Sir, said his science officer, their projectile was moving at nearly 30% light speed. Our shields are designed to stop energy weapons, not solid objects at that velocity. Kairos looked at the human ship with new respect. These creatures might be primitive, but they weren't helpless. All ships, prepare for battle, but do not destroy. The human vessel yet. I want to study their tactics. On the Defiant, Deho watched as the entire Velcrin fleet began to move forward. Well, crew, it looks like we got their attention. All hands prepare for battle. This is what we trained for. The lone human ship held its position as over 1,000 enemy vessels approached. The crew knew they were about to die, but not one of them suggested retreat. They had drawn the line in space, and they would hold it no matter what. The battle that would change the galaxy was about to begin. The Velcrin fleet spread out like a dark cloud across space. Admiral Kairos had ordered his ships into attack formation, but he was still puzzled by the human response. Most species would have run by now, but the single human vessel continued to hold its position. It reminded him of a small animal facing a predator, too frightened to move. Admiral, said Commander Vex, all ships report ready for battle. Should we begin the attack? Kairos studied the tactical display. The human ship was completely surrounded now, with nowhere to run even if it wanted to. Begin with suppression fire. I want to disable their weapons and engines, not destroy them. These humans intrigue me. The order went out to the fleet. Dozens of Velcrin ships opened fire with their suppression weapons, designed to knock out enemy systems without causing fatal damage. Blue energy beams crossed space toward the Defiant. On the human ship, alarms blared as the enemy fire approached. Captain Deho gripped the arms of his command chair. All power to shields. Evasive. Maneuvers. The Defiant rolled and twisted through space, trying to avoid the incoming fire. But there were too many beams coming from too many directions. Several struck the ship, causing sparks to fly from control panels throughout the bridge. Shield strength. Down to 60%, reported Chief Engineer Wu Bin from his station. Hull integrity holding, but we can't take much more of this. Lieutenant Su Jin worked frantically at her tactical station. Captain, I'm reading weak points in their shield patterns. If we can hit them with concentrated fire, do it, Deho. Ordered. The Defiant's rail cannon spoke in unison. 6 tungsten rods shot out at incredible speed, all aimed at the same Velcrin cruiser. The first projectile punched through the alien ship's shields. The second and third tore into its hull. The fourth, fifth, and sixth rounds found something vital deep inside the ship. The Velcrin cruiser exploded in a ball of white fire on the Devastator's bridge. Kairos watched in shock as one of his ships died. How did they do that? Our shields should have stopped those projectiles. His science officer was studying the readings. Sir, the humans are using pure kinetic energy. Their projectiles have no energy signature for our shields to lock onto. They just punch right through. But their weapons are so primitive. Primitive. Yes, but effective. At those velocities, even a simple metal rod becomes a devastating weapon. Kairos felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. These humans were not behaving according to any tactical manual he knew. They should have surrendered after the first exchange of fire. Instead, they had destroyed one of his ships and were preparing to fire again. All ships, concentrate fire. On the human vessel, use full power. A command went out across the fleet. Hundreds of energy weapons turned toward the Defiant. When they fired, space lit up like a small star had been born. The human ship disappeared in the blaze of enemy fire. Its shields failed instantly, and energy beams tore into its hull. But somehow it survived. When the light faded, the Defiant was still there, badly damaged, but still fighting. Impossible, whispered Vex. Nothing could survive that much firepower. On the Defiant, half the crew was dead or wounded. The bridge was filled with smoke and the smell of burned electronics. Captain Deho wiped blood from a cut on his forehead as he looked around at his surviving officers. Status report, he called out. Sujin's voice was weak but determined. Weapon systems operational. We have 3 rail cannons left. Engines are damaged but working. Life support is failing. Wu Bin struggled to his feet beside a sparking control panel. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Emergency force fields are holding, but barely. We have maybe 10 minutes of air left. Ensign Hyjin was slumped over her communications console, but she managed to lift her head. Captain, I'm picking up transmissions from the Velkran fleet. They're demanding our surrender again. Deho stood up slowly. His legs were shaky, but his voice was strong. Open a channel to their flagship. Admiral Kairos appeared on the damaged view screen. His expression had changed from amusement to something like respect. Your ship is dying, human. Your crew is dying. Surrender now, and I will spare the survivors. I appreciate the offer, Deho said, but we're not done yet. Not done? Look at your ship. You cannot win this battle. Maybe not, Deho admitted, but we can make you remember it. He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. All remaining power to engines. Set course for the Velkran flagship. Ramming. Speed? The bridge crew stared at their captain. Sujin was the first to understand. Sir, you're talking about a suicide run. I'm talking about doing our job, Deho replied. Our orders were to protect human space. That ship is the command center of their entire fleet. If we can take it out, we might give our people a chance. Wu Bin nodded slowly. I can give you full power, Captain. But the engines won't last long. At maximum. They don't need to last long. Sujin, prepare all remaining weapons. I want everything we have ready to fire when we get close. The Defiant turned toward the massive Velkran flagship and accelerated. Its damaged engines roared with power as the ship built up speed. On the bridge, the surviving crew members worked. At their stations with quiet determination, Hyjin looked up from her console. Captain, I'm receiving messages from Earth. They want to know our status. Tell them we're holding the line, Deho said. Tell them we're buying time for the fleet to prepare. And tell them... He paused, thinking of his wife and children. Back on Earth, tell them we did our duty. The message went out across human space. In command centers and military bases, officers listened in stunned silence as they realized what the crew of the Defiant was about to do. On the Velkran flagship, Kairos watched the human ship approaching at incredible speed. They're going to... Ram us, all weapons, fire? Stop them! The Velkran fleet poured fire into the approaching human ship. Energy beams tore chunks from its hull and set its interior on fire. But the Defiant kept coming, driven by the determination of its crew. 30 seconds to impact, Sujin reported. Her tactical station was sparking and smoking, but she stayed at her post. All weapons ready. 20 seconds, called Wu Bin. Engine temperature critical. We're going to lose power any second. 10 seconds, said Hyjin. Captain, it's been an honor serving with you. The honor was mine, Deho replied. All weapons fire. The Defiant's remaining rail cannons fired their last shots directly into the Devastator's bridge. The tungsten rods punched through the flagship's armor and exploded inside the command center. A second later, the human ship slammed into the massive Velkran vessel. The collision was like a meteor strike. The Defiant was completely destroyed, but its sacrifice left the Devastator crippled and drifting. Admiral Kairos survived, but barely. Half his bridge crew was dead, and his flagship would need months of repairs. As the wreckage of the Defiant spread through space, something extraordinary happened. The ship's data core, protected by emergency armor, survived the collision. Inside, it were detailed scans of Velkran technology, tactical information, and a complete record of the battle. The data core's emergency beacon activated. sending everything the Defiant had learned back to human space. The information would prove invaluable in the war to come. Admiral Kairos, bleeding from his wounds, stared at the debris field where the human ship had been. In 300 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like this. These humans had fought with a courage that defied all logic. "Sir," said one of his surviving officers, "what are your orders?" Kairos was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than before. "Send a message to the fleet. We will withdraw to a safe distance and assess our damage." "Withdraw, sir, but we've barely begun the conquest." "These humans are not like the others," Kairos said quietly. "They do not fight for territory or resources. They fight for something else, something I do not understand." As the Velcrin fleet pulled back to regroup, the wreckage of the Defiant continued to drift through space. The ship was gone and its crew was dead, but their sacrifice had done something no one expected. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Velcrin Empire had been forced to retreat. The news of the Defiant's last stand spread across human space like wildfire. In government buildings, military bases, and civilian colonies, people gathered around communication screens to watch the recordings that had been transmitted back from the battle. The images were clear. One human ship had held off an entire alien fleet and damaged their flagship before being destroyed. Captain Jin A. Song stood in the briefing room of the UES Retribution, humanity's newest battleship. Around the table sat the commanders of the hastily assembled human defense fleet. The data from the Defiant sacrifice lay spread before them in holographic displays and tactical readouts. "The good news," Jin said, "is that we now know exactly what we're facing. The bad news is that it's worse than we thought." Commander Tae-young Park leaned forward to study the displays. "Their shields can't stop kinetic weapons at high velocity. That gives us an advantage. One advantage against 1,000 disadvantages," replied Captain Dongwook Kim. "Look at the size of their ships. Their smallest cruiser is bigger than our largest battleship." Dr. Yoon-Soo Han, the fleet's chief science officer, had been studying the technical data for hours. "There's something interesting here. Their technology is more advanced than ours, but it's also more specialized. They've spent centuries fighting species that use energy weapons. They're not prepared for our kinetic projectiles." Janae nodded. "That's what Captain Daeho and his crew discovered. But we can't win a straight fight. We need to be smarter." The tactical display showed the positions of both fleets. The Velcrins had withdrawn to the edge of the Proxima system to repair their flagship. Human intelligence suggested they were also waiting for reinforcements. The humans, meanwhile, had gathered every available ship to make their stand. "What's our total strength?" asked Tae-young. 237 ships. Jin-ae replied. "Everything from heavy battleships to converted cargo haulers with guns strapped on. The Velcrins have over 1,000. "But now we know their weaknesses," said Yoon-soo. "I've been working with the engineering teams. We can modify our weapons to be even more effective against their shields." She activated a new display showing weapon modifications. "If we accelerate our projectiles to 40% light speed instead of 30, we can punch through their armor, not just their shields. And if we use fragmentation rounds instead of solid slugs, the damage would be massive." Tae-young finished. "But can our ships handle that kind of acceleration stress?" "Some of them," Yoon-soo admitted. "The newer ships like the Retribution can manage it. The older ones will need modifications." Captain Dongwook shook his head. "We don't have time for major modifications. The Velcrins could attack at any moment." "Then we use what we have," Janae said firmly. "And we use it in ways they don't expect." She stood up and activated the main tactical display. "The Velcrins have been conquering worlds for 300 years. They have a system, and it's worked perfectly every time. Overwhelming force, demand surrender, destroy resistance. They expect us to either run or fight them ship to ship." "So what do we do instead?" asked Tae-young. "We make them come to us. And when they do, we spring every trap we can think of." The meeting lasted for hours as the human commanders planned their defense. They had learned much from the Defiance battle, but they also knew that the Velkrans had learned too. The next engagement would be different. Meanwhile, on the crippled Velkran flagship, Admiral Kairos was dealing with his own problems. The damage to his ship was extensive, and his crew was shaken by their first real defeat in centuries. Worse, reports were coming in from other parts of the fleet that made no sense. "Sir," said Commander Vex, her arm in a sling from the collision, "the engineering teams have finished their analysis of the human weapons. What did they find?" "The projectiles are simple metal rods, sir. Nothing exotic about them at all. But they're accelerated to incredible speeds using magnetic fields. At those velocities, even basic materials become devastating weapons." Kairos studied the damage reports from his own ship. The human projectiles had punched clean through multiple decks before exploding. How is it possible that such primitive technology can be so effective? "I think," said his science officer carefully, "that we may have underestimated these humans. Their technology is not advanced, but it is well suited to their needs. And their tactics—" "What about their tactics?" "Sir, in our database of conquered species, we have records of over 400 different civilizations. Not one of them ever used suicide attacks as a primary battle tactic. The humans seem to consider it a normal military option." Kairos thought about the moment when the human ship had turned toward his flagship. There had been no hesitation, no attempt to negotiate. The human captain had simply decided that destroying the Velkran command ship was worth the lives of his entire crew. What kind of species thinks like that? He wondered aloud. "I don't know, sir. But I recommend we treat them as extremely dangerous." The admiral looked out at the stars where the human fleet was gathering. Intelligence reports suggested they had managed to assemble about 200 ships of various sizes. It should still be an easy victory for the Velkran fleet, but Kairos was no longer certain of anything. "Send a message to High Command," he ordered. "Request additional ships and support. Tell them the humans are more dangerous than anticipated." The message was sent, but it would take weeks for reinforcements to arrive. Kairos would have to complete the conquest with the forces he had. The question was whether those forces were enough. As both fleets prepared for the coming battle, something else was happening that neither side fully understood. Word of the Defiant's heroic last stand was spreading beyond human space. Other species that had been conquered by the Velkrans were hearing the story and beginning to ask themselves a dangerous question: if humans could fight back, why couldn't they? On a dozen different worlds, in underground meeting places and secret communications networks, the seeds of rebellion were being planted. The Velkran Empire had ruled through fear for 3 centuries, but fear was a fragile thing. Once it was broken, it could never be completely rebuilt. Captain Jinne stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as human ships took their positions throughout the solar system. They had chosen their battlefield carefully, the asteroid belt around Proxima Centauri, where the rocky debris would provide cover and make it hard for the massive Velkran ships to maneuver. "All ships report ready for battle," announced Lieutenant Subin Lee from the communications station. "Good," Jinne replied. "Send a message to the fleet. Remind them what we're fighting for. We're not just defending our colonies. We're defending the idea that free people have the right to stay free." The message went out to every human ship. On bridges and in crew quarters, men and women prepared for a battle they might not survive. But unlike the crews of conquered worlds, they were not preparing to surrender. They were preparing to fight. The battle that would determine the fate of human independence was about to begin. And thanks to the sacrifice of Captain Deho and the crew of the Defiant, the humans finally knew how to hurt their enemies. The question was whether knowing how to fight would be enough to win. The battle for Proxima Centauri began at dawn, ship time. Admiral Kairos had finally received his orders from High Command: complete the conquest regardless of casualties. The Velkran Empire could not afford to show weakness, especially not to a species as primitive as the humans. Captain Jinne watched from the bridge of the Retribution as the massive alien fleet approached. The humans had positioned their ships throughout the asteroid belt, using the rocky debris as cover. It was a desperate strategy, but it was the only one that gave them any chance of survival. "Enemy fleet entering weapons range," reported Lieutenant Subin from the sensor station. "I count 800 ships, sir. They've left some behind to guard their damaged flagship." "Understood," Janae replied. "All ships, execute Plan Alpha, target their lead elements, and fall back to the second line." The human fleet opened fire as soon as the Velkrans came within range. Rail cannons across dozens of ships launched their deadly projectiles at incredible speeds. The tungsten rods streaked through space like shooting stars, aimed at the most vulnerable points of the enemy vessels. The results were immediate and devastating. Unlike their previous encounters with energy-based weapons, the Velkran shields offered no protection against the kinetic projectiles. Human rounds punched through alien hulls and exploded inside the ships, causing massive damage, but the Velkrans had learned from their first encounter too. Their formation spread out, making it harder for the humans to concentrate their fire. Return fire from hundreds of energy weapons lit up the asteroid belt like a deadly light show. Commander Tae-young Park, leading the human destroyer squadron, watched as 3 of his ships were destroyed in the first exchange. "All units, scatter formation. Use the asteroids for cover." The human ships darted between the rocky debris, using their superior maneuverability to avoid the worst of the enemy fire. But there were simply too many Velkran ships. For every alien vessel the humans destroyed, they lost 2 of their own. On the Retribution, Dr. Yoon-soo monitored the battle from the science station. "Captain, the weapon modifications are working better than expected. Our rounds are penetrating their hulls completely." "Good," Janae replied as her ship shook from a near miss. "But we need to do more damage faster. Order all ships to focus. Fire on their command vessels." The human fleet changed tactics, concentrating their attacks on the larger Velkran ships that seemed to be coordinating the enemy advance. It was risky, as these vessels were more heavily defended, but the strategy began to pay off. One by one, Velkran command ships went dark, their bridges destroyed by precisely aimed kinetic rounds. Admiral Kairos, monitoring the battle from his damaged flagship, watched in growing frustration as his carefully planned attack fell apart. "How are they doing this? We outnumber them 4-1. "Sir," said Commander Vex, "the humans are using the asteroid field to their advantage. Our larger ships can't maneuver effectively in that debris field, but their smaller vessels can." "Then we go around it." "We've tried, sir. They have ships positioned at every exit point, and their weapons—" Vex didn't need to finish. Everyone on the bridge could see the tactical displays showing Velkran ships being torn apart by human kinetic weapons. The Empire's energy shields and advanced armor meant nothing against simple metal rods moving at incredible speeds, but the humans were paying a price too. Captain Dongwook's battleship Indomitable took a direct hit from 3 Velkran cruisers and broke apart, taking its crew of 600 with it. The destroyer Courageous tried to ram a Velkran dreadnought and was vaporized by point defense weapons before it could close the distance, yet for every human ship that died, its crew fought to the end. There were no surrender calls, no requests for mercy. When their weapons were destroyed, they rammed. When their ships were crippled, they used them as shields for others. The Velkrans had never faced an enemy that refused to give up. "Sir," called out Sebin from her station, "I'm getting reports from across human space. Other colonies are under attack, but they're fighting back. No one is surrendering." Janae felt a grim satisfaction. The word had gone out after the Defiance sacrifice. Humanity would not go quietly into slavery. Every colony, every outpost, every ship would fight until the end. Reports were coming in from across the war zone. On New Geneva, civilian cargo haulers had been armed with improvised weapons and were attacking Velkran landing craft. On Kepler Station, the entire population had evacuated to underground shelters and were conducting guerrilla warfare against occupation forces. Most shocking of all, other species were beginning to rebel. The Thraxians, conquered 50 years ago, had risen up and attacked their Velkran garrison. The Morlocks, enslaved for over a century, was sabotaging mining operations across 3 star systems. Admiral Kairos received these reports with growing alarm. The human rebellion was spreading like a virus throughout his empire. Species that had been peaceful slaves for generations were suddenly remembering what freedom felt like. "Sir," said his intelligence officer, "we're receiving messages from High Command. The rebellions have reached the core worlds. They're demanding immediate action." Kairos looked at the tactical display showing the battle still raging in the asteroid belt. His fleet was winning, but slowly and at great cost. And every hour they spent fighting the humans was another hour for the rebellions to spread. "All ships," he ordered. "Full assault. No more careful tactics. I want every human ship destroyed within the hour." The Velcran fleet surged forward, abandoning their defensive formations for an all-out attack. Energy weapons fired continuously, turning entire asteroids into molten slag. The human fleet found itself surrounded and outnumbered, but they didn't break. Captain Jin'ei watched as her fleet was slowly torn apart around her. The Retribution was one of the last major human ships still fighting, its armor scarred and its shields failing. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet determination even as explosions shook the ship. "Captain," said Tae-young over the com from his remaining destroyer, "we can't hold them much longer. Should we signal a retreat?" Jin'ei looked at the tactical display. They had destroyed nearly 200 Velcran ships, an incredible achievement for a force their size. But there were still hundreds more enemy vessels and only a handful of human ships left. "Negative," she replied. "We hold the line. Every minute we keep them here is another minute for Earth to prepare its defenses." "Understood, sir." "It's been an honor." The final phase of the battle was brief but brutal. The remaining human ships formed a tight defensive circle and poured everything they had into the approaching enemy. Velcran ships died under the concentrated fire, but there were always more to take their place. One by one, the human vessels fell silent. The destroyer Vigilant exploded in a ball of white fire. The cruiser Determined lost power and drifted helplessly until enemy fire tore it apart. The converted freighter Second Chance rammed a Velcran battleship and took it down in mutual destruction. Finally, only the Retribution was left. Its weapons were gone, its engines were failing, and half its crew was dead. But Captain Jin'ei refused to surrender. "All remaining power to forward shields," she ordered. "Set course for the Velcran flagship. Ramming speed." "Sir," said Dr. Yun-Su, blood running down her face from a head wound, "the ship won't survive the acceleration." "Then we'll die as we lived," Jin'ei replied. Free! The Retribution made its final run toward Admiral Kairos's repaired flagship. Velcran fire tore chunks from its hull and set its interior on fire, but the ship kept coming. At the last moment, Jin'ei sent a final message to human space. "This is Captain Jin'ei Song of the UES Retribution. We have held the line as long as possible. The rest is up to you. Remember us and remember what we died for. Humanity will never surrender." The ship struck the Velcran flagship and both vessels disappeared in a massive explosion. Admiral Kairos survived, but barely. His fleet had won the battle, but at a cost he had never imagined possible. As the Velcran fleet limped away from the asteroid belt, they left behind the wreckage of both fleets. But they also left behind something else. Proof that the Velcran Empire could be defeated across the galaxy. On worlds that had been conquered and enslaved, people looked up at the stars and began to hope. The humans had shown them something. They had forgotten that freedom was worth dying for. The real war was just beginning. 2 years had passed since the Battle of Proxima Centauri, and the galaxy was no longer the same place. The Velcran Empire, which had ruled unopposed for 3 centuries, was crumbling from within as rebellion spread across dozens of star systems. Admiral Jin'ei Song stood on the bridge of the U's Liberation, humanity's new flagship. She had been promoted after surviving the crash of her escape pod from the Retribution, and now she commanded the largest fleet in human history. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency that had become humanity's trademark. In warfare, "Admiral," said Captain Subin Lee, now her second in command, The Thraxian fleet reports they're in position. The Morlock resistance fighters have sabotaged the orbital defense platforms. We're ready to begin the final assault. Janae nodded as she looked at the tactical display. The target was Velcros Prime, the capital world of the Velcran Empire. For 300 years it had been considered unconquerable. Today, that would change. The human fleet was no longer the desperate collection of converted freighters and outdated warships that had fought at Proxima. These were purpose-built. Warships designed with lessons learned from 2 years of continuous warfare. Their kinetic weapons had been refined to punch through any known defense, and their tactics had evolved far beyond anything the Velcrans understood. All ships, Janae announced. This is the moment we've been fighting for. Today we end the Velcran Empire's reign of terror. Today we give freedom back to the galaxy. The combined rebel fleet dropped out of hyperspace around Velcros Prime. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species moved in perfect coordination, their crews united by a common cause. Humans worked alongside Thraxians, Morlocks, and a dozen other races that had thrown off their chains. Admiral Kairos, now commanding the last intact Velcran fleet, watched the approaching armada with something approaching despair. His empire was collapsing, his fleets were scattered, and his people were losing faith in their superiority. The humans had done more than defeat them militarily. They had broken their spirit. "Sir," said Commander Vex, "the rebel fleet outnumbers us 3-1. Their ships are better armed and better coordinated than anything we've faced before." Kairos looked at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy. The human ships were in the center of the formation, their kinetic weapons ready to tear through Velcran defenses. Around them, the ships of liberated species provided support and cover. How did it come to this? He wondered aloud. We were the masters of the galaxy? The humans changed everything, Vex replied quietly. They showed the other species that we could be beaten. Once that fear was gone, she didn't need to finish. Once the fear was gone, the Empire had no foundation left to stand on. The Velcrans had ruled through intimidation and overwhelming force, but the humans had proven that force could be overcome by determination and sacrifice. The battle for Velcros Prime was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The rebel fleet attacked in waves, using tactics that the Velcrans couldn't counter. Human kinetic weapons punched through defensive lines, while Thraxian plasma cannons provided covering fire. Morlock fighters, small and fast, darted through the chaos to attack critical targets, but it was the humans who provided the backbone of the assault. Their ships were in the thick of every engagement, their crews fighting with the same desperate courage that had marked every battle since the Defiant's last stand. They took casualties, but they never retreated. Admiral Kairos found himself fighting a defensive battle for the first time in his career. His ships were powerful, but they were designed for conquest, not defense. The rebel fleet pressed their attack relentlessly, breaking through one defensive line after another. "Sir," called out the communications officer, "we're receiving surrender calls from our outer defense platforms. The humans are offering terms." Kairos almost laughed. The humans were offering terms to the Velcran Empire. It would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. What are their terms? Complete disarmament of all Velcran military forces. Release of all enslaved populations. Reparations to be paid to conquered species and ... The officer hesitated. "And what? War crimes trials for all senior military officers?" Kairos understood. The humans weren't just seeking military victory. They wanted to completely dismantle the empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 centuries. It was thorough, it was just, and it was exactly what he would have done in their position, on the bridge of the Liberation. Janae watched as the last Velcran defensive lines crumbled. The planet below was defenseless, its orbital platforms destroyed or surrendered. The Velcran fleet was scattered and defeated. "Admiral," said Subin, "we're receiving a transmission from the Velcran flagship. Admiral Kairos wants to speak with you directly. Put him through." The main screen showed the interior of the damaged Velcran command ship. Admiral Kairos appeared, his uniform torn and his expression defeated. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of lost pride. Admiral Song, I am prepared to discuss terms of surrender. Jin-A studied the alien commander who had caused so much suffering across the galaxy. She felt no hatred, only a tired satisfaction that the war was finally ending. The terms are unconditional surrender, she said simply. Your empire ends today, Kairos nodded slowly. I understand. But I must ask ... what made you humans so different? Why did you fight when every other species surrendered? Jin-A considered the question. It was something she had thought about many times during the long war. Because surrender wasn't living, she said finally. It was just existing. We chose to live free or die trying. Everything else followed from that choice. The formal surrender took place on Velcros Prime itself. Admiral Kairos signed the documents that dissolved the Velcran Empire and freed hundreds of worlds from slavery. Across the galaxy, bells rang and people celebrated as the news spread, but the real work was just beginning. The liberated species needed help rebuilding their societies. Former slaves needed education and support. The Velcrans themselves needed to be integrated into a new galactic order based on cooperation rather than conquest. Jin-A found herself appointed as the first commander of the Galactic Defense Alliance, a coalition of free worlds dedicated to preventing any future empire from rising to threaten galactic peace. It was a position she had never wanted, but one she couldn't refuse. The headquarters of the new alliance was built in the asteroid belt around Proxima Centauri, at the exact spot where Captain Deho and the crew of the Defiant had made their heroic stand. A memorial was erected there, listing the names of all who had died for freedom. The inscription, written in dozens of languages, read simply, "Here, a single ship and her crew proved that the size of the fleet matters less than the strength of the hearts within it." Years passed. The galaxy healed from centuries of oppression. New technologies were shared freely between species. Trade and cooperation replaced conquest and slavery. Children grew up learning about the war only from history books, living in a universe where freedom was the birthright of all intelligent life. Admiral Kairos lived out his remaining years in quiet exile on a small colony world. He wrote memoirs that became required reading in military academies across the galaxy, not as a guide to conquest, but as a warning about the dangers of believing in one's own invincibility. In his final entry, he wrote, "We thought we were unstoppable, because we had never met anyone willing to die to prove us wrong. The humans taught us that there are things worth more than life itself. They called it freedom. And once we understood what they meant, we realized we had never truly been free ourselves." Jin-A, now gray-haired and approaching retirement, stood once again on the bridge of a human starship. But this time she was not preparing for battle. She was part of a joint fleet, with ships from dozens of species on a mission of exploration to the far reaches of the galaxy. "Admiral," said her aide, a young Thraxian officer, "the deep space sensors are detecting something interesting. It might be a new species." Jin-A smiled. "Then we'd better go introduce ourselves properly. Send the standard peaceful contact message. Let them know we come in friendship." The fleet changed course toward the unknown signal. As they traveled through hyperspace, Jin-A thought about how much the galaxy had changed. Where once there had been conquest fleets, now there were exploration missions. Where once there had been slaves, now there were partners. It had all started with one ship and one captain who refused to move aside. Captain Deho Kim and the crew of the Defiant had drawn a line in space and dared the universe to cross it. Their sacrifice had lit a fire that burned across the galaxy, bringing light to worlds that had known only darkness. The human warship that had blocked the path of the Velcran Empire was gone, but its legacy lived on in every free world. Every liberated people, and every child who would grow up knowing that freedom was worth fighting for. The galaxy was at peace, and it would remain so as long as there were those willing to stand guard against the darkness. The new galactic order had begun.